I want to start today with a thought experiment. It is a little bit gruesome, so maybe brace yourself.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Imagine you are in a surgical theater. You have a patient on the table, and hypothetically, this is purely hypothetical, you completely sever the connection between their brain and their gut.
You mean everything?
And everything. You cut the vagus nerve, you sever all the spinal connections, you achieve total neural isolation. The brain and the skull can no longer send a single signal to the stomach or the intestines.
Right.
So here is the question. What happens to digestion?
Well, if you ask most people, or even a first-year medical student, they usually say the system shuts down.
Exactly.
They assume the brain is the CEO, and without orders from headquarters, the factory floor goes dark.
Right. I mean, if you cut the nerves to your hand is paralyzed. If you disconnect the brainstem from the lungs, you stop breathing. But here is the hook, and honestly, it is one of the most unsettling yet fascinating facts in all of human physiology.
The gut keeps working.
The gut keeps working.
It does. It might be a little clumsy at first, you know? It might not know exactly when to speed up and slow down based on whether you're anxious or relaxed, but the stomach will still churn.
It'll still churn.
The intestines will still push food forward. The fluid exchange, which is this massive logistical operation, will just continue.
That concept that the gut is the only organ system capable of truly autonomous function is the foundation for everything we are talking about today. It's why scientists call it the second brain.
And that autonomy is exactly what we're exploring in this deep dive.
Welcome to Pharma 50, Motility, Flow, and Expulsion.
Or as you like to put it, keeping things moving.
Today is all about the pharmacology of directed movement. We are looking at how the gut moves material from point A to point B, how it manages a staggering amount of fluid, and what happens when it decides to hit the emergency eject button.
It's such a critical area of study because so many GI disorders, whether it's simple constipation, debilitating gastroparesis, or something awful like chemotherapy-induced vomiting, they're all essentially disorders of flow and coordination.
And to unpack this, we're synthesizing two heavyweight sources.
We are. We've got the chapter on gastrointestinal motility and water flux from Goodman and Gilman, which, as always, provides that deep mechanistic molecular reasoning.
That's our why.
And we are pairing it with the chapter on drugs used in the treatment of gastrointestinal disorders from Kitsung, which is our clinical scaffold.
That's the how. It connects the molecules to the actual patient sitting in the clinic.
And as always, I have to give the disclaimer. This is an interpretive synthesis. We are creating a conceptual map to help you navigate this really dense material.
We're not replacing the textbooks?
Absolutely not. You still need to open Kitsung for the dosage tables and Goodman and Gilman for those incredibly detailed signaling diagrams. This conversation is the prep work, not the substitute for the reading.
Okay, so if we're building a map for our listeners today, what are the major landmarks? What are the key takeaways they should have by the end of this?
We have 5 key territories to cover. First, we have to understand the machine itself, the enteric nervous system. We need to get why it can run on its own and the crucial difference between moving things forward, which is peristalsis, and just mixing them up, which is segmentation.
Propulsion versus mixing. Got it.
Then we move to the breakdowns.
Well,
We'll talk about hypomotility, when the conveyor belt stops, and the prokinetic drugs we use to restart it.
from there, we flip the script to constipation and laxatives. But we're going to look at this through the lens of fluid physics, not just taking a pill to go. We'll talk about how the gut handles liters and liters of water every single day.
And why even tiny shifts in that balance can lead to, well, disaster. Then we tackle the opposite problem, diarrhea, and how to slow things down.
And finally, the grand finale.
The most complex reflex of all,
Yeah.
emesis, vomiting.
Yeah.
It's unpleasant, but the pharmacology behind stopping it is some of the most sophisticated and targeted stuff in all of medicine.
The goal then, by the end of this hour, is to move you beyond just treating symptoms.
Exactly. We don't want you thinking, patient has nausea, give drug X. We want you thinking about the pathway. Is this a vestibular trigger? A serotonin trigger from the gut? A dopamine trigger in the brain? We want mechanism-based choices.
Okay, let's do it. We started with this idea that the gut is a second brain. Let's look at the hardware. How does this autonomy actually work?
The hardware is the enteric nervous system, or the ENS. And when we say second brain, we are not exaggerating. I mean, the gut contains hundreds of millions of neurons.
That's an unbelievable number.
That's more neurons than you have in your entire spinal cord.
Wow. And it's not just a random mesh of wires, right? It's organized. The source material highlights 2 distinct networks, or plexuses.
Wow.
The myenteric and the submucosal.
That's right.
I always struggle to keep their functions straight. Is there an easy way to visualize this?
Absolutely. Think about where they live. Structure dictates function. The myenteric plexus, which is also known as Auerbach's plexus, is literally sandwiched right between the two massive layers of muscle that wrap around the gut tube.
You've got the inner circular muscle and the outer longitudinal muscle.
Right. The myenteric plexus is the meat in that muscle sandwich.
So if it's living directly inside the muscle layers, its job has to be motor control.
Precisely. Myo means muscle. The myenteric plexus is the engine room. It drives the contractions, the tone, the rhythm, the velocity. If you want to move food, you have to talk to Auerbach's plexus.
Okay, so that's the engine, the brawn. What about the submucosal plexus?
The submucosal plexus, or Meissner's plexus, sits closer to the inside of the tube, just underneath the mucosal lining.
So it's not near the big muscles.
No, it's near the glands, the blood vessels, and the cells that are sensing the environment inside the gut.
So it's environmental control, the brains of the operation.
You can think of it as the life support system. It's regulating secretion, absorption, and local blood flow. It's tasting the chemical environment. If you eat something too spicy or, a bacterial toxin, the submucosal plexus senses it and ramps up secretion to flush it out.
So we have the engine room, the myenteric, and life support, the submucosal. Now, the text mentions something called the law of the intestine. It sounds a bit like something from the Old Testament, but I assume it refers to how these plexuses actually coordinate to move food.
It is the fundamental rule of peristalsis. And this is where the autonomy just shines. If you put a bolus of food, or let's just say a marble, into an isolated piece of intestine on a lab bench, the gut has to do a very complex, coordinated dance.
Right.
It needs to squeeze behind the marble to push it, but it also has to relax in front of the marble so it has somewhere to go.
It's the toothpaste tube analogy. I always come back to this. If you squeeze the middle of the tube, but you leave the cap screwed on tight, you aren't moving any toothpaste. You're just creating pressure.
You're just creating a mess.
You have to squeeze from the bottom and unscrew the cap simultaneously.
Exactly. But here is the kicker. The brain doesn't coordinate that. The ENS does it all by itself, via a local reflex arc.
How does that work on a molecular level?
When that bolus of food stretches the gut wall, specialized cells in the lining called enterochromaffin cells release serotonin, 5-HT.
Serotonin. I have a feeling we're going to be hearing that name a lot today.
It is the lingua franca of the gut. That serotonin hits the sensory nerves and the signal splits. One signal travels upstream or behind the bolus. This is called the ascending excitatory reflex.
The squeeze.
The squeeze. It triggers motor neurons to release acetylcholine and substance P, and that causes the circular muscle to contract powerfully.
Okay, and the other signal, the unscrewing of the cap.
That signal goes downstream or head of the bolus. This is the descending inhibitory reflex. It triggers a different set of neurons to release nitric oxide, NO, as well as vasoactive intestinal peptide, or VIP, and ATP. These chemicals tell the muscle to relax.
The open cap.
The open cap. And that entire chemical cascade, serotonin release, acetylcholine squeeze, nitric oxide relaxation, has to fire perfectly in sequence for every single inch that food moves through 20 feet of intestine.
Thousands upon thousands of times a day, without you ever thinking about it once. That's incredible.
It really is.
But it raises a question. If the gut is just reacting to food stretching it, does it stop working when we're empty? Does the factory just shut down at night between meals?
No. And this is a crucial concept that both Goodman and Gilman and Kensung emphasize. The gut has two distinct modes. The fed state, which we just described, is all about that coordinated peristalsis and segmentation to mix and move food.
Right.
But when you're fasting, say you haven't eaten for 3 or 4 hours or you're asleep, the gut switches to a completely different program. It's called the migrating motor complex, or MMC.
The outline calls this the housekeeper.
A better analogy might be the nightly cleaning crew in a big office building. When all the workers, which is the food, finally leave for the day, the cleaning crew comes in to take out the trash.
So what does that look like in the gut?
Every 90 to 110 minutes or so during fasting, a massive, powerful wave of contraction starts in the stomach. This is called phase 3 of the MMC, and it sweeps like a broom all the way down to the end of the ileum.
And this is loud, right? This is the stomach growling.
Yes. When your stomach growls, you usually think, oh, I'm hungry. But physiologically, that sound is the MMC, that powerful phase 3 contraction, squeezing air and residual fluid through your empty stomach. It's literally the sound of cleaning.
What's it cleaning out?
It's sweeping out any undigested debris, dead mucosal cells, and crucially, bacteria. It keeps the bacterial population in the small intestine very low by constantly pushing them down into the colon where they belong.
So if you're someone who snacks constantly, a grazer,
If you graze, you constantly interrupt the MMC. As soon as you eat, the Fed program starts, and the clock for the MMC resets. The cleaning crew never gets to work.
and this has clinical implications.
Huge. This is one of the leading theories behind small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO. If you never let the MMC run its course, bacteria from the colon can migrate backwards up into the small intestine because nothing is sweeping them back down.
That puts a whole new perspective on things like intermittent fasting. It's not just about calories, it's about giving the janitor a full shift to work.
It's giving the gut time to reset and clean house. And this whole process is paced by a special set of cells.
The interstitial cells of Cajal.
Right. These aren't neurons, and they aren't muscle cells. There's something in between. They are the metronome of the gut. They generate these spontaneous electrical slow waves that set the basic rhythm. The nerves then play on top of that rhythm, deciding when to turn a slow wave into an actual contraction.
So we have the machine running, we have the engine room and life support, the cleaning crew and the metronome, but systems fail. Let's move to section 2, hypomotility, when the conveyor belt just stops.
This is a major clinical problem. We see it in gastroparesis, which literally means paralyzed stomach. It's very common in long-standing diabetes, where high blood sugar has damaged the vagus nerve.
What does that feel like for a patient?
It's miserable.
Mhm.
They take 1 or 2 bites of food and feel profoundly full and bloated because the stomach just isn't emptying, or they might vomit undigested food that they ate 8 hours earlier.
We also see it in GERD or reflux and post-operative ileus where the bowel just goes to sleep after surgery.
Exactly.
So the intuitive answer would be, well, the gut uses acetylcholine to squeeze, so let's just give the patient an acetylcholine-like drug.
And we tried that. We have drugs like bethanacol, which is a cholinememetic. It mimics acetylcholine. The problem is it's a blunt instrument. It's like turning all the lights in a house on with one giant switch.
There's no nuance.
No, it's like shouting, "Contract!"
Yeah.
at the entire 25 feet of intestine simultaneously.
Going back to the toothpaste tube, that's like squeezing the whole tube at once from all sides.
Right. You get cramping, you get sweating, you get increased acid production, you get muscle contraction, but you do not get propulsion. You are not coordinating that squeeze behind, relax ahead rhythm.
So you're just tightening the whole system into a knot.
Precisely. To fix this, we need drugs that restore coordination. We call them prokinetics.
And to get coordination, we have to be more subtle. We have to manipulate the control signals, not just the muscle itself. The outline highlights 2 main levers we can pull: dopamine and serotonin. Let's start with dopamine.
This is a little counterintuitive, but in the gut, dopamine is largely an inhibitor. It acts as a brake.
A brake.
Yes, it binds to D2 receptors on cholinergic neurons in my enteric plexus, and it suppresses the release of acetylcholine. So under normal conditions, dopamine helps to keep the gut quiet and relaxed.
So if we want to get things moving, we need to cut the brake lines. We need a dopamine antagonist.
Enter metoclopramide and domperidone. These drugs block those D2 receptors. By removing the dopamine brake, the gut is free to release acetylcholine in its normal, coordinated fashion.
So you're not forcing a contraction, you're just allowing the natural one to happen more easily.
Exactly. This increases the tone of the lower esophageal sphincter, which helps with GERD, and it stimulates gastric emptying, which helps with gastroparesis.
Now, metoclopramide is the workhorse here, but it's famous, or maybe infamous, for its side effects.
And this brings us right back to that brain-gut connection. Metoclopramide is a small molecule. It doesn't just block dopamine in the gut. It readily crosses the blood-brain barrier.
And dopamine is absolutely vital in the brain for coordinating movement. The whole Parkinson's disease pathology is a loss of dopamine neurons.
Precisely. So if you block dopamine receptors in a part of the brain called the basal ganglia, you can induce what are called extrapyramidal symptoms, or EPS.
And this isn't just a headache or some mild side effect.
No. We're talking about acute dystonia, where a patient's neck might twist painfully to one side and get stuck there. Or agathisia, which is a feeling of intense, unbearable inner restlessness where they literally cannot sit still. They feel like they have to jump out of their skin.
That sounds terrifying for a patient who just wanted some relief from their heartburn.
It is. With long-term use, you can even see tardive dyskinesia, which involves involuntary movements of the face and tongue that can be permanent. That's why metoclopramide carries a black box warning from the FDA. It is effective, but you have to respect the pharmacology.
So cutting the brake, the dopamine, has significant risks. What about the other lever, hitting the gas pedal with serotonin?
Specifically, the 5-HT4 receptor. Remember how serotonin from the enterochromaffin cells is what kicks off the whole peristaltic reflex?
Right, it's the initial trigger.
Well, if we stimulate the 5-HT4 receptors on those presynaptic cholinergic neurons, we enhance the release of acetylcholine. But, and this is the key, we do it within the natural, rhythmic, coordinated firing of the gut.
So it's not a spasm, it's like turning up the volume on the natural signal.
That's a perfect analogy. It drives these high-amplitude propagating contractions, especially in the colon. This brings us to a newer drug called prucalopride. It is a highly selective 5-HT4 agonist, and it's mainly used for chronic constipation that hasn't responded to other treatments.
I noticed you really emphasize the word selective. Is there a ghost story here?
There is a massive one. In the 1990s, we had a drug called cisapride. It was a blockbuster, a huge seller for reflux and motility disorders. It worked on 5-HT4 receptors, and it got things moving beautifully.
What?
But it was a dirty drug. It wasn't selective. It hit other targets.
What else did it hit?
Critically, it blocked the HERG potassium channels in the heart. These channels are absolutely essential for resetting the heart's electrical rhythm after each beat, what we call repolarization.
And if you block them?
If you block them, you delay that repolarization. This shows up on an ECG as a long QT interval. And a long QT interval puts you at high risk for a fatal arrhythmia called torsades de pointe.
People were having heart attacks from their heartburn medication.
Essentially, yes. Fatal cardiac arrests. Cisapride was eventually pulled from the market in most countries. It was a huge cautionary tale.
It's such a stark reminder. When we talk about a drug's mechanism of action, we usually focus on the therapeutic target. But the side effect profile is often just the drug hitting a similar-looking target in the wrong organ.
That's pharmacology in a nutshell. Prucalopride was engineered specifically to avoid that HERG channel. It was designed to fit perfectly into the 5-HT4 receptor in the gut, but to be the wrong shape for the potassium channel in the heart. That is the triumph of modern medicinal chemistry.
Before we leave prokinetics, the outline mentions motilin agonists, using an antibiotic to move the gut. That seems strange.
It's a fascinating bit of pharmacological serendipity. Erythromycin, a common macrolide antibiotic, just happens to look structurally similar to a natural gut hormone called motilin.
And what does motilin normally do?
Motilin is the hormone that's released during fasting to trigger that big phase 3 housekeeper wave of the MMC.
Ah, so it initiates the cleaning crew.
Exactly. So if you give a patient a low dose of IV erythromycin, it binds to motilin receptors and triggers one of those massive, powerful contractions that starts in the stomach and sweeps everything out.
So it's a powerful purge. When would you use that?
It is the most powerful prokinetic we have for dumping the stomach in an emergency. For instance, if a patient has a big upper GI bleed, you need to clear all the blood out so you can see where it's coming from with an endoscope. A dose of erythromycin will do that.
But it's not for long-term use.
No, not at all. The body adapts almost instantly. It's a phenomenon called tachyphylaxis. The receptors downregulate, and it just stops working after a few doses or a few weeks of use. It's a short-term, powerful tool.
Okay, let's shift gears. We have talked about the machine failing to move. Now let's talk about the output itself. Section 3. Constipation and laxatives.
This is one of the most common complaints that brings people to a doctor. But to treat it effectively, we really need to understand the fluid physics of the gut. The numbers here are just mind-blowing.
I was shocked by this when I was reviewing the material. We think of digestion as dealing with solid food, but really, it's mostly a water management problem.
It is a river. Think about it. On an average day, you might drink about 2 liters of fluid.
Okay.
But your body adds a huge amount to that. Your salivary glands, your stomach-making acid, your pancreas, your liver-making bile, all told. The gut actively secretes about 7 additional liters of fluid into the lumen every single day.
So, 9 liters of fluid are entering the top of the tube.
9 liters, a massive volume. And how much of that fluid actually comes out on the stool at the other end?
It's a tiny fraction. The texts say about 0.1 liters or 100 milliliters.
Right, so the system has to reabsorb 8.9 out of 9 liters. That's 99% efficiency.
And that incredible efficiency is actually the problem, isn't it? It's a razor's edge.
It's a razor's edge. If your gut works just a little bit too well and reabsorbs, say, 8.95 liters instead of 8.9, your stool becomes rock hard. That's constipation.
And if it fails just slightly and only reabsorbs 8.5 liters, you suddenly have an extra 400 milliliters of fluid exiting. That's significant diarrhea.
So treating constipation isn't just about pushing the solid matter. It's about winning the tug of war for water. Almost all laxatives are, at their core, water manipulation devices.
Okay, the outline helpfully categorizes them into four main classes. Let's run through them. Class 1, bulk forming agents. This is your psyllium, your metamucil, methylcellulose.
This is the most physiological approach. These are essentially just fiber. They are hydrophilic colloids that don't get digested or absorbed. They just sit in the gut and act like a sponge, soaking up water.
How does being a wet sponge help move things along?
It increases the mass, the volume, and the softness of the stool. That bulk distends the colon wall. And remember the law of the intestine. Stretching the wall is the primary trigger for peristalsis. So by bulking up the stool with water, you trigger the natural reflex to push.
It's simple, it's generally very safe, but the main complaint from patients is often bloating and gas.
And that's the downside. Gut bacteria love some of these fibers. They ferment them. And the byproduct of that fermentation is gas, methane, hydrogen. And that causes the bloating.
Okay, class 2, osmotic agents. The outline calls them the water magnets.
These are molecules that we ingest, but that the body can't absorb across the gut wall. They stay inside the tube. And because you now have a high concentration of these molecules inside the tube, basic osmosis dictates that water must flow from the body into the tube to try and dilute them.
You're literally pulling water into the bowel.
You're trapping it there. And polyethylene glycol, or PEG, is the king here. This is your Miralax for daily use, or Golightly for colonoscopy prep.
What makes PEG so special?
PEG is fascinating because it's chemically inert.
Yeah.
The body doesn't digest it, doesn't absorb it, doesn't metabolize it. And critically, gut bacteria don't ferment it, so you get much less gas and bloating than with fiber. It just sits there, holding on to water molecules.
And it's scalable.
Exactly. A small daily dose, 1 capsule, just keeps a stool soft enough for comfortable regular movements. But if you drink a whole gallon of a balanced PEG electrolyte solution, which is what we do for bowel prep, the sheer volume of water held in the gut is so massive that it physically washes everything out. It's a mechanical flush.
Then you have these saline laxatives, magnesium citrate, milk of magnesia.
These work the same way through osmosis, but they are salts. The potential danger here is that some of the magnesium or phosphate is absorbed into the bloodstream.
Okay.
If you have a patient with healthy kidneys, they just pee out the excess, no problem at all. But if you give a bottled magnesium citrate to an elderly patient with renal failure,
They can't clear the magnesium.
and you can induce hypermagnesemia, which can cause heart block, muscle weakness, and respiratory depression. It's rare, but it's a classic board exam question and a very real clinical risk we have to be aware of.
Class 3 seems to be the most controversial group. The stimulant laxatives, senna, basalcadil, the irritants.
These work completely differently. They don't just manipulate water. They directly irritate the mucosal lining of the gut and stimulate the enteric nerves to fire. They are directly forcing a contraction.
Now, I have heard, and I think many listeners have probably heard this too, that you should never take these daily because your colon will get addicted or lazy, that you'll get a so-called cathartic colon that forgets how to work on its own.
That is one of the most persistent myths in all of medicine. The idea was that chronic use of these stimulants would actually destroy the nerves in the myenteric plexus.
So you'd end up worse off than when you started.
That was the fear. But when we look at the actual data, and Katsung is very clear on this, there is no convincing evidence that long-term use of recommended doses of drugs like senna or basalcadil damages the enteric nervous system.
Really? So where did that myth even come from?
It probably dates back to the turn of the century when laxative formulations contained really toxic compounds, things that were genuinely damaging. But the modern agents we use today, for patients who are, for example, on chronic opioids for pain or elderly patients who are bedbound, these drugs are often necessary for years, even decades.
And the lazy colon fear often leads to undertreating patients who are in real misery.
It does. The bigger risk is not treating the constipation. So this is a huge takeaway. We shouldn't be afraid of the tool if the clinical situation calls for it.
Finally, class 4, the secretory agents. This sounds like the high-tech stuff.
These are drugs like lubiprostone and linaclotide, and they represent a real shift in our thinking. Instead of just trapping water that's already in the gut, these drugs actively pump chloride ions into the gut.
How do they do that?
They target specific chloride channels on the apical surface of the gut lining. Lubiprostone, for instance, activates a channel called the CLC2 channel. It opens the gate, and chloride ions flow out of the cells and into the lumen.
And where salt goes?
Water follows. Basic physics. The negative chloride ions pull positive sodium ions along with them. The resulting sodium chloride creates a powerful osmotic gradient, and water floods into the gut to follow it.
It's essentially reverse engineering the mechanism of secretory diarrhea in order to treat constipation.
That's exactly what it is.
Mm.
Linaclotide does something similar but through a different channel, the CFTR channel, the same one that's defective in cystic fibrosis.
Which is a perfect transition to our next section, section 4, slowing the flow, diarrhea.
If constipation is too much reabsorption, diarrhea is too little. It's technically defined as a stool weight greater than 200 grams per day, but what it really means is increased water content. And in acute cases, like a viral gastroenteritis or traveler's diarrhea, the biggest danger isn't the inconvenience, it's the dehydration and electrolyte loss.
And the primary treatment for that is one of the greatest public health victories in modern history. Oral rehydration therapy, or ORT.
It is. It saves millions of lives, mostly children, every year. And it works because of a very specific molecular trick.
You'd think, I'm dehydrated, I should just drink water.
But if the gut is inflamed and secreting fluid, plain water can't be absorbed effectively. It might just run right through.
So how do we get it in?
We have to hack a transporter. There's a specific protein in the gut wall called the SGLT1 transporter, which stands for sodium glucose cotransporter 1. Its job is to pull 1 molecule of sodium and 1 molecule of glucose from the gut into the body at the same time.
A 2-for-1 deal.
A 2-for-1 deal. And even in a very sick, inflamed gut, this transporter usually keeps working. So if you give a solution that contains both salt and sugar in the right ratio, the SGLT1 transporter will pull them into the body.
And once again, where the solutes go, the water follows.
Exactly. Water follows osmotically. That's why things like soda, which is all sugar and no salt, or plain chicken broth, which is all salt and no sugar, don't work nearly as well as a properly formulated solution like Pedialyte or the WHO rehydration salts. You have to use the molecular key.
But if the motility itself is the problem and we need to stop it pharmacologically, we turn to the ultimate brakes for the gut.
Opioids.
Opioids.
They are the most effective antidiarrheal agents we have. They hit mu-opioid receptors in the enteric plexus, which powerfully inhibits the release of acetylcholine.
So no acetylcholine, no muscle contraction.
Peristalsis just grinds to a halt. Plus, they increase the tone of the anal sphincter, which helps with the urgency and incontinence that often comes with severe diarrhea.
But obviously, we don't want to prescribe morphine for a case of Montezuma's revenge. We want the gut effect without the brain effect.
Right. We need a peripheral opioid.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where loperamide, or Imodium, comes in. Loperamide is a potent opioid agonist, but it has a very special property. It's a substrate for a pump in the blood-brain barrier called P-glycoprotein.
What does that pump do?
It's an efflux pump. It recognizes loperamide and actively throws it back out of the brain as soon as it tries to enter.
So it can't get in to cause a high or sedation or respiratory depression?
Exactly. It stays in the body, paralyzes the gut beautifully, but gives you 0 central nervous system effects at normal doses.
Then there's the other common one, diphenoxylate, which is in Motility.
This one is a bit different. Diphenoxylate can cross into the brain at high doses and cause euphoria. So, to prevent abuse, the drug companies did something very clever. They mixed it with a tiny amount of a second drug, atropine.
Atropine is an anticholinergic.
Yes, at the normal therapeutic dose of Lomotil, the amount of atropine is so small it does nothing. But if an addict tries to take, say, 20 pills to get an opioid high, they also get a massive dose of atropine.
And what does that do to them?
It makes them feel awful. Dry mouth, blurred vision, racing heart, nausea, urinary retention. It's a built-in abuse deterrent. It punishes the attempt to misuse the drug.
It's a poison pill strategy. You can have your relief, but if you try to abuse it, we will make you miserable.
It's a great example of smart pharmaceutical formulation.
One other antidiarrheal worth mentioning is bismuth subsalicylate, good old Pepto-Bismol.
A fascinating compound with multiple mechanisms. The salicylate part is anti-inflammatory, just like aspirin. The bismuth part is thought to be antimicrobial, and it binds to bacterial toxins, like the ones produced by E. coli in traveler's diarrhea.
But it has that one very startling, though harmless, side effect.
The black tongue and black stool.
Right.
Bismuth reacts with the tiny amounts of sulfur in your saliva and in your gut sulfur, which is produced by bacteria, to form bismuth sulfide. And bismuth sulfide is jet black.
So patients will call their doctor in a total panic, thinking they have a necrotic tongue, or, worse, internal bleeding causing melena.
And you just have to reassure them. It's completely harmless, but it looks like death. You should always warn the patient when you recommend it.
All right, we've reached the final section, the most dramatic expulsion of them all. Section 5, the eject button, emesis.
Vomiting. It is a violent, complex, highly coordinated event. It's not just the stomach contracting. It involves the diaphragm, the abdominal wall muscles, the closure of the glottis to protect the airway.
And it's all orchestrated by a network in the brainstem, in the medulla, called the vomiting center.
Right. But the vomiting center is like a general in a bunker. It doesn't see the battlefield itself. It relies on intelligence reports from its scouts.
And there are 4 main scouts, or inputs.
Exactly. First, you have the vestibular apparatus in the inner ear. This is your motion detector. It tells the brain, the horizon is tilting, but my body feels still. That mismatch is the trigger for motion sickness.
Okay, that's input 1.
Second, you have the vagus nerve and other afferent nerves coming from the gut itself. They're reporting things like, I've just been stretched too much, or there's an irritant down here, or chemotherapy just killed a bunch of my cells.
Third,
The cortex. Higher brain centers. This is where anxiety, fear, or even just a disgusting sight or smell can trigger nausea. This is anticipatory nausea.
and finally, the really interesting one, the chemoreceptor trigger zone, or CTZ.
The CTZ is a key player. Katzung and Goodman and Gilman both spend a lot of time on it. It's located in a very specific part of the brainstem called the area postrema.
And the crucial detail about the area postrema is its location relative to the blood-brain barrier.
The key thing is that it lies outside the blood-brain barrier.
Wait, explain that. The brain is supposed to be this fortress, completely guarded by the BBB.
Most of it is.
Yeah.
But the CTZ is like a guard tower that's been deliberately built just outside the castle walls. It has permeable capillaries, which means it can directly taste the blood. It's constantly sampling your circulation for toxins, metabolic waste products like in kidney failure, or, importantly, drugs.
So when you give a patient a dose of chemotherapy, the drug circulates, the CTZ tastes it in the blood, and it immediately pulls the fire alarm and sends a signal to the vomiting center.
Exactly. And because there are all these different inputs, there was no single magic bullet anti-vomit drug. You have to match the drug to the specific pathway that's being activated.
So if I get seasick on a boat, that's a vestibular trigger.
Right. The vestibular pathway runs primarily on acetylcholine via muscarinic M1 receptors and histamine via H1 receptors. So to treat it, you need an anticholinergic like a scopolamine patch or an antihistamine like dramamine or meclizine.
A serotonin blocker like Zofran isn't going to help me much there.
Not very much, no. It's the wrong pathway.
But if a patient is undergoing highly immunogenic chemotherapy, something like cisplatin, that's a completely different war.
That is a full-scale assault on multiple fronts. The chemotherapy directly triggers the CTZ, because it's in the blood, and AST-AD, it damages those enterochromaffin cells in the gut, causing them to release a massive flood of serotonin.
So you have alarms going off in the blood and in the gut simultaneously.
Right, so we need the heavy artillery. The outline describes a cocktail approach for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, or CINV.
This is a rescue mission.
It is, and we've learned through decades of research that CINV happens in 2 distinct phases. Phase 1 is the acute phase. It happens immediately, within the first 24 hours. And this is almost entirely driven by that massive serotonin flood from the gut hitting 5-HT3 receptors on the vagus nerve.
So the treatment for that has to be a 5-HT3 antagonist. These are the C-trons. Ondansetron, which is Zofran, Granisetron, Polonosetron.
These drugs revolutionized cancer care. Before we had the C-trons, vomit was so severe and uncontrollable that some patients would actually refuse potentially life-saving chemo.
And they work by blocking the signal at both ends.
Yes, they block the 5-HT3 receptors on the vagus nerve in the gut, and they block them in the CTZ and the brainstem as well to shut down the immediate heave.
But then patients would go home feeling okay, and then 2 or 3 days later.
Phase 2, the delayed emesis. We've learned that this is a completely different mechanism. The serotonin has mostly faded by then, but now we see a release of a different neurotransmitter in the brainstem, substance P.
And substance P binds to its own receptor.
It binds to neurokinin 1, or NK1 receptors. So your Zofran, which only blocks serotonin, stops working.
You need a different tool.
You need an NK1 antagonist, like Prevident. So the modern standard of care for any high-risk chemotherapy is a multi-drug cocktail.
What's in the cocktail?
You give all 3 up front. First, a 5-HT3 antagonist for the acute serotonin-driven phase. Second, an NK1 antagonist for the delayed substance P-driven phase. And third, a corticosteroid, usually dexamethasone.
Why the steroid? What's its role?
Honestly, we don't fully know the exact mechanism. It probably works in several ways, maybe by reducing inflammation in the brainstem or by changing the permeability of the blood-brain barrier to the chemo drugs. But what we know clinically is that it dramatically boosts the effectiveness of the other two drugs. It's the force multiplier.
It really emphasizes that modern pharmacology is about precision. You don't just treat nausea. You have to identify the neurotransmitter. Is it serotonin, histamine, substance P, dopamine? And you specifically target its receptor.
That is the essence of modern therapeutics.
So let's zoom out. We've gone from the top to the bottom and back to the brain. What does this all mean? We started with that thought experiment of the severed nerves.
And we learned that the gut is a machine that really wants to run. The enteric nervous system provides the autonomy, but it's a machine that's controlled by a delicate balance of chemical signals. Serotonin and acetylcholine are the gas pedals. They drive propulsion and secretion.
And dopamine and opioids are the brakes.
They're the brakes. They inhibit motility and slow things down. And every single drug we discussed today, from prokinetics to laxatives to antihetics, is just a sophisticated way of tapping one of those pedals.
Prokinetics either take the foot off the brake, like dopamine antagonists, or press the gas, like serotonin agonists.
Laxatives are all about hacking the physics of water to either bulk up the stool or pull fluid into the bowel. Antidiarrheals slam on the opioid brakes.
And animetics are like skilled intelligence officers intercepting specific alarm signals before they can reach the command center in the brainstem.
A perfect summary.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, though, the provocative thought to end on. We've spent the last hour talking about serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine. If I walked out of this room and into a psychiatry lecture next door, those are the exact same three neurotransmitters they would be discussing for depression, psychosis, and cognition.
The overlap is near total. The gut and the brain literally speak the same chemical language.
Which explains so much about the side effects we see in practice every day. We treat a patient's depression with an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. What is the #1 side effect when they start the drug?
GI upset, nausea, cramps, diarrhea. Because you're not just boosting serotonin in the brain, you're boosting it in the gut, which wakes everything up.
And we treat a patient's psychosis with a powerful dopamine blocker.
And we get constipation and slowed gastric emptying because we've slammed on the dopamine brake in the gut.
It just powerfully reinforces that second brain concept. You cannot chemically treat the brain and the skull without sending powerful echoes and reverberations through the brain in the gut.
They are inextricably linked. You have to treat the patient as one whole integrated system.
Listeners, we have covered a huge amount of ground today, but we cannot stress this enough. Go to the source material.
Please do.
Open Goodman and Gilman's chapter on GI motility. Look at those beautiful diagrams of the vomiting reflex. Visualize the CTZ sitting there just outside the blood-brain barrier, pasting the blood.
And open Kitsum's chapter on GI drugs. Look at the tables that classify the laxatives. Read the contraindications. See for yourself the warning about using magnesium in patients with renal failure.
We've given you the narrative, the conceptual map. The books give you the hard data. You absolutely need both to master this.
You do.
Thanks for diving deep with us into the world of motility. Keep things moving, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.